David, I can't do this anymore. You deserve someone who can give you the life you want, Jessica said, sliding her engagement ring across the cafe table with the practiced precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. My name is David Chun, 34 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon in October, I thought I was going to marry the woman I'd loved for 3 years. The ring made a soft scraping sound against the wood as it came to rest beside my untouched coffee. I looked at it for a moment, then back at her face, noting the careful makeup and the new designer purse I'd never seen before. I understand, I said quietly, picking up the ring and slipping it into my jacket pocket. No drama, no pleading, no accusations. Just acknowledgement of a decision that had clearly been made long before this conversation. Jessica's perfectly manicured fingers fidgeted with her phone case, a nervous habit she developed over the past few months. It's not that I don't care about you, David. You're a good man. Stable, reliable, kind. But I need someone who shares my ambitions, someone who understands what I want out of life. She paused, glancing around the modest cafe where we'd had our first date. Marcus gets it. He has vision, drive. He's building something real. Marcus. I nodded slowly, filing away the name. Marcus Sterling? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Her eyes brightened with the enthusiasm she used to reserve for talking about us. Yes, Marcus Sterling. He's the CEO of Sterling Tech Solutions. You might have heard of them. They're growing incredibly fast. He's already talking about expanding into international markets, maybe an IPO in a few years. She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo of a man in an expensive suit standing next to a silver BMW. He understands that life is about creating opportunities, not just settling for comfortable. I studied the photo for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to be polite, not long enough to seem interested. What Jessica didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I knew Sterling Tech Solutions very well. I should. My investment fund owns 60% of it. He sounds ambitious, I said, standing and leaving a 20 on the table. I hope he makes you happy, Jessica. I really do. She looked surprised by my calm response, maybe even a little disappointed. I think Parher had expected a fight, some dramatic declaration that would make her feel more important, more desired. Instead, she got exactly what she'd always gotten from me, quiet acceptance and genuine concern for her well-being. As I walked to my 10-year-old Honda Civic, I could feel her watching through the cafe window. 3 years together, and she still didn't understand that my calm was indifference. It was control. The same control that had built my actual life while she'd been frustrated by the surface of it. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, not because I was emotional, but because I was processing. Jessica Martinez had just left me from Marcus Sterling, CEO of a company that existed primarily because of a $2 million investment I'd made 18 months ago through my shell company, Meridian Capital Partners. The irony was almost artistic. But irony wasn't what occupied my thoughts as I drove home to my modest 2-bedroom apartment in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood. What interested me was the timeline. Jessica and I had been having lifestyle compatibility conversations for about 6 months. Sterling Tech had been burning through cash at an alarming rate for exactly the same period. The correlation was probably coincidental, but in my experience, coincidences in business usually weren't. I'd met Jessica 3 years earlier at the same cafe, actually. I'd been reviewing quarterly reports for my portfolio companies, laptop open, financial statements spread across a small table like homework. She'd been at the counter, frustrated because the espresso machine was broken and she was already late for work. I'd offered to share my regular coffee. She'd accepted, and we'd ended up talking for 2 hours about everything except what I actually did for a living. That conversation had set the pattern for our entire relationship. Jessica knew I worked in software, that I'd been involved in a successful startup, that I lived comfortably but modestly. She knew I read financial news obsessively and had strong opinions about market efficiency and consumer behavior. What she didn't know was that the comfortable life she found so frustratingly average was a deliberate choice, not a limitation. At 28, I'd sold my first company, a data analytics platform for e-commerce, to a larger tech firm for $25 million. After taxes and paying out my co-founders and early employees, I'd walked away with enough money to never work again if I chose not to. Instead, I'd chosen to work differently. I became what the industry calls an angel investor, though I prefer to think of myself as someone who helped build things worth building. The key word was quietly. My investment vehicles were structured through shell companies and trusts that kept my name out of public records. When I attended board meetings, which was rarely, I was represented by proxies or attended via video conference. The entrepreneurs I funded knew me as David from Meridian Capital. If they knew me at all, most just knew they had a silent partner who asked good questions, provided valuable advice, and never interfered with day-to-day operations. This arrangement suited me perfectly. Growing up with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat had taught me the difference between having money and showing money. I'd watched her date men who flashed cash and drove nice cars, only to discover they were leveraged their eyeballs and treating her like an accessory. I'd learned early that real wealth whispers while fake wealth shouts. Jessica, unfortunately, had grown up in a different world. Her father was a successful dentist, her mother a real estate agent in an upscale suburb. Not wealthy but comfortable, and very focused on maintaining appearances. Jessica had inherited their appreciation for the visible markers of success without quite understanding how those markers were actually achieved. For the first 2 years of our relationship, this difference had been charming. She'd tease me about my minimalist lifestyle, and I'd enjoy her enthusiasm for trying new restaurants and planning weekend getaways. She brought color and spontaneity to my methodical world, and I brought stability and thoughtfulness to hers. It worked. The shift had been gradual but unmistakable. It started with comments about her friends' relationships. Ashley's boyfriend had just bought a house in the hills. Lauren was dating a guy who'd taken her to Paris for their 6-month anniversary. Sarah had gotten engaged, and the ring was absolutely gorgeous. Probably cost more than your car, David. Always said with a laugh, but the comparison was always there. Then came the lifestyle inflation suggestions. Why did we move to a nicer apartment? Why did I drive such an old car when I could clearly afford better? Why was I so resistant to investing in our image when appearances mattered for career advancement? These conversations always ended the same way, with Jessica frustrated by my lack of ambition, and me trying to explain that ambition and ostentation weren't the same thing. The truth was, I could have given Jessica everything she thought she wanted: the luxury apartment, the expensive dinners, the international vacations, the ring that cost more than most people's cars. But I'd tried that approach in a previous relationship, and it had taught me a valuable lesson about what happens when someone falls in love with your lifestyle instead of you. Her name had been Victoria, ironically enough. We'd met at a tech conference where I was speaking about angel investing. She was smart, ambitious, working for a startup that needed funding. I'd been open about my success from the beginning, thinking honesty was a foundation of a good relationship. For 6 months, it had been perfect. Victoria appreciated my work, understood my world, shared my interest in building innovative companies. Then I'd noticed the changes. The way she'd name-drop our relationship in professional settings. The expensive taste she developed that aligned perfectly with my ability to afford them. The way conversations about our future always centered around the lifestyle we could have rather than the life we could build. When I'd suggested we take a step back from the expensive restaurants and weekend trips, focus more on simple time together, she'd been honestly confused. Why would we do that when we don't have to? She'd asked. Isn't the whole point of success being able to enjoy it? She wasn't wrong, exactly, but she wasn't right either. The point of success, for me, was freedom. Freedom to choose how to spend my time. Freedom to take risks on ideas I believed in. Freedom to be generous without keeping score. The expensive lifestyle Victoria enjoyed wasn't success. It was just expensive. When I'd ended that relationship, she'd been genuinely shocked. But we're perfect together, she protested. We want the same things. No, I'd replied sadly. You want my things. That's different. So with Jessica, I'd made a different choice. I'd let her know me as David the software engineer who lived modestly and invested carefully. I'd planned to tell her about the real scope of my wealth eventually. Maybe when we got engaged, maybe when we got married. I wanted her to love the person I was, not the portfolio I'd built. The irony wasn't lost on me that my attempt to find authentic love had led Jessica straight to a man whose entire lifestyle was funded by my money. At home, I pour myself a scotch, not because I was drowning my sorrows, but because good scotch helps me think clearly. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Sterling Tech files from my secure drive. Time to review exactly what Jessica's new boyfriend had been doing with my investment. Sterling Tech Solutions had been founded 3 years ago by Marcus Sterling and 2 co-founders who'd since been bought out. The company provided cloud-based customer relationship management software for mid-sized businesses, a crowded market, but one with room for innovation. Marcus had pitched me through my investment fund 18 months ago, looking for $2 million in series of funding to expand their sales team and develop additional features. His pitch had been solid, if not spectacular. The product was competent, the market opportunity was real, and Marcus himself had come across as driven and knowledgeable. Not the most impressive entrepreneur I had ever funded, but far from the worst. The due diligence had checked out, the initial metrics had been promising, and I'd approved the investment. What I was looking at now, however, was concerning. The company's burn rate had increased dramatically over the past 6 months, from a manageable $120,000 per month to over $200,000. Revenue growth had plateaued, and worse, they lost 2 major clients in the last quarter. The customer acquisition cost had nearly doubled while the lifetime value remained flat. In simple terms, Sterling Tech was spending twice as much to acquire customers who were worth half as much. But the most interesting detail was in the expense reports I received as a major investor. Marcus's salary was reasonable, but his expense account was not. $1,500 dinners, premium hotel stays, a company car allowance that appeared to cover the lease on a BMW 7 Series. For a company that was supposed to be conserving cash and preparing for profitability, Marcus was living like a tech CEO who'd already had his exit. I opened another file, this one containing social media monitoring that my assistant conducted on all portfolio company executives. It was standard due diligence, not stalking. What I found was Marcus Sterling's Instagram account, which read like a lifestyle magazine. Photos at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to wine country, shots of luxury watches and designer suits, all carefully curated to project success and sophistication. And there, in the most recent post, was Jessica. The photos were recent, probably from the past few weeks. Jessica at a rooftop bar I recognized as one of the most expensive in the city. Jessica in what looked like a very expensive dress at what appeared to be a charity gala. Jessica smiling beside Marcus as he showed off a watch that my quick research suggested cost about $15,000. I sat back in my chair, processing. Marcus Sterling was courting my ex-girlfriend with money that was quite literally mine. The expensive dinners, the luxury lifestyle, the charity galas, all of it funded by an investment account that I controlled. The situation would have been funny if it weren't so perfectly representative of everything I tried to avoid. But what struck me wasn't anger, it was curiosity. Jessica had left me because she wanted someone who understood ambition and success. She found someone who understood how to project ambition and success. Whether he understood how to actually achieve those things remained to be seen. I opened my calendar and made a note. Sterling Tech's next board meeting was scheduled for the following month. The company would be presenting their quarterly results and discussing their need for additional funding to reach profitability. As their largest investor, I had significant input on that decision. For the first time since Jessica had slid that ring across the table, I smiled. I wasn't planning revenge. Revenge was emotional, reactive, ultimately self-defeating. What I was planning was much simpler and much more effective. I was planning to be exactly who I'd always been, a careful investor who made decisions based on data, not emotion. Marcus Sterling would succeed or fail based on his own merits, his own choices, his own ability to deliver results. The fact that those choices had led him to build a lifestyle he couldn't afford while courting a woman who'd left me for not being ambitious enough was simply an interesting data point. I finished my scotch and closed the laptop. Tomorrow I would start making some very quiet phone calls to gather more current information about Sterling Tech's situation. Not because I was planning anything vindictive, but because I owed it to my investors, including myself, to make informed decisions about the companies in my portfolio, whether Jessica realized it or not. She was about to get a front row seat to the difference between a man who had success and a man who performed it. I was curious to see which one she'd prefer once the performance ended. But first, I had a company to evaluate and a business decision to make. Everything else was just interesting context. 3 days after breakup, I received an email that made everything significantly more interesting. It was from my portfolio management company, a routine quarterly update on Sterling Tech's financial situation. The subject line was marked urgent, review required. I opened it over my morning coffee, expecting the usual metrics and projections. What I found instead was a company in free fall. Sterling Tech had lost another major client, their largest account representing 30% of their annual recurring revenue. The client, a mid-sized manufacturing company, had cited service reliability issues and lack of responsive support in their cancellation notice. This was corporate speak for a company that was too busy projecting success to actually deliver it. The loss would drop Sterling Tech's monthly revenue from $400,000 to $280,000, while their expenses remained at over $200,000 per month. More concerning was a note from the company's CFO, a competent woman named Patricia Wells, whom I'd insist to be hired during the initial investment process. Mr. Sterling has been unresponsive to cost reduction recommendations and continues to maintain high discretionary spending despite our deteriorating cash position. We need immediate investor guidance on operational changes or additional funding requirements. I closed the email and pulled up Marcus Sterling's social media again. Posted just yesterday was a photo of him and Jessica at what appeared to be a wine tasting in Napa Valley. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to invest in experiences that inspire greatness. Grateful for this incredible woman, who reminds me that success is meant to be shared." The location tag showed they were staying at a resort where rooms started at $800 per night. The mathematics were simple. Marcus was spending money faster than his company was making it, and he was spending it on the woman who'd left me because I wasn't ambitious enough. The situation was developing exactly as I'd expected, just faster than I'd anticipated. That afternoon, I did something I rarely did with my portfolio companies. I called Patricia Wells directly. "Mr. Chun," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "Thank you for reaching out. I wasn't sure if our reports were getting proper attention." "They're getting attention," I assured her. "Walk me through the current situation, Patricia." Not the sanitized version Marcus has been presenting, the real situation. There was a pause. Then she spoke more freely. "We're in trouble." The Hartwell manufacturing cancellation was the latest in a series of service failures. Our customer success team has been reduced to skeleton crew, while resources went to sales expansion that never materialized. We're losing clients faster than we're acquiring new ones, and the clients we're acquiring have lower average contract values. And Mr. Sterling's response to these issues? Another pause. He believed the problems are temporary market fluctuations. He's focused on maintaining company image and investor confidence. He's concerned that cost-cutting measures would send negative signals to the market. I translated this corporate diplomacy in my head. Marcus was more concerned with looking successful than being successful, and he was burning through investor money to maintain that appearance. Classic startup death spiral behavior. "What's your professional assessment of our cash runway?" I asked. "At current burn rate, we have 4 months of operating capital remaining. If we lose another major client, that drops to 6 weeks. I thanked Patricia and hung up, then spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing every document in the Sterling Tech file. Board meeting minutes, financial reports, customer feedback, employee reviews. The picture that emerged was of a company with solid fundamental technology being poorly managed by a CEO who was more interested in entrepreneurial theater than actual entrepreneurship. That evening, I made a decision that would seem small but would prove decisive. I changed my RSVP for Sterling Tech's next board meeting from send proxy to will attend in person. It would be the first time I'd physically appeared at a Sterling Tech meeting. The first time Marcus Sterling would meet the man who owned most of his company. The timing was perfect. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks out, exactly when Sterling Tech will be presenting their quarterly results and requesting additional funding to cover their operational shortfall. Marcus would be in the position of having to justify his company's performance and his own decisions to the people who held his company's future in their hands. But before that meeting, I wanted to understand exactly how bad things had become. I spent the next week conducting what I called market research. I spoke with former Sterling Tech employees who'd been laid off in recent cost reduction efforts. I reviewed online forums where their customers discussed service issues. I had lunch with executives from competing companies who were happy to share their perspectives on Sterling Tech's market position. The picture that emerged was worse than even Patricia Wells had indicated. Sterling Tech wasn't just losing customers due to service issues. They were losing customers because Marcus had been overselling capabilities they didn't have and making promises they couldn't keep. The company's reputation in their target market was damaged, possibly irreparably. Meanwhile, Marcus's social media presence continued to document his lifestyle with Jessica. Photos from expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, shopping trips where Jessica modeled designer clothes and jewelry. Each post was carefully crafted to project success and abundance. What Marcus didn't realize was that he was creating a public record of exactly how he was spending money that belonged to his investors. 1 week before the board meeting, I received a text from Jessica. It was the first communication since our breakup. "David, I hope you're doing well. I know this might be awkward, but I wanted you to hear this from me. Marcus and I are getting engaged. I'm really happy." I stared at the message for a long moment, processing the implications. Jessica was getting engaged to a man whose company was weeks away from bankruptcy, using money that belonged to me to fund a lifestyle that was about to collapse. The irony was so complete it felt almost scripted. I replied simply, "Congratulations. I hope you'll be very happy together." What I didn't tell her was that Marcus Sterling had just made the biggest mistake of his professional life. By proposing to Jessica, he'd committed to a lifestyle level that his actual financial situation couldn't support. The engagement ring alone, based on the photo Jessica had posted on her Instagram, had probably cost more than Marcus made in salary for 2 months. He was betting his future on a company that was failing and an investment relationship he didn't understand. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning at Sterling Tech's offices in a modern building downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early, parking my Honda between a BMW and a Tesla, both probably leased by people who were about to have very difficult conversations about money. The Sterling Tech offices were impressive, all glass and chrome, and carefully curated startup aesthetics. Expensive furniture, state-of-the-art technology, a kitchen stocked with premium coffee and organic snacks. It was exactly the kind of workspace that looked successful while burning through cash at an unsustainable rate. Marcus Sterling greeted the board members in the conference room, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people spend on clothing in a year. He was tall, confident, with the kind of polished presentation that worked well in investor meetings and social media photos. When he was introduced to me as David Chun from Meridian Capital Partners, I watched his face carefully for any recognition. There was none. As far as Marcus knew, I was just another investor, probably someone's accountant or lawyer, definitely not someone worth his full attention. He shook my hand with the distracted politeness he reserved for people who weren't important enough to remember. "Mr. Chun," he said, already looking past me toward the other board members. "Thanks for making time to join us today. I think you'll be excited about our growth trajectory and expansion opportunities." I nodded politely and took a seat at the far end of the conference table, where I could observe without drawing attention. For the next hour, I watched Marcus Sterling present a version of reality that bore little resemblance to the actual state of his company. According to Marcus, Sterling Tech was strategically repositioning for accelerated growth. The recent client losses were natural market consolidation that would ultimately benefit the company by allowing them to focus on higher value customers. The increased burn rate was investment in future capabilities that would pay dividends in the next fiscal year. It was a masterful performance, delivered with conviction, and supported by carefully selected metrics that told the story Marcus wanted to tell rather than the story the data actually supported. If I hadn't done my own research, I might have been impressed. But I had done my own research. And when Marcus finished his presentation and opened the floor for questions, I spoke for the first time. "Mr. Sterling," I said quietly, and something in my tone made the room go still. "Could you walk us through your customer retention metrics for the past 6 months? Not the acquisition numbers you've shown us, but the retention numbers." Marcus's confident smile flickered for just a moment. "Our retention numbers are within industry standards," he said carefully. "We've seen some natural churn as we've upgraded our service offerings, but nothing outside normal business parameters." I opened the folder I'd brought with me and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "According to my analysis, Sterling Tech has lost 42% of its customer base in the past 6 months. Your largest remaining contract represents 38% of your total revenue, and that client has submitted a formal service complaint in each of the past 3 months." The room went completely silent. Marcus's face had gone pale beneath his expensive tan. "Furthermore," I continued in the same quiet tone, "your current burn rate exceeds your revenue by $60,000 per month, and your cash position will reach critical levels within 6 weeks unless immediate action is taken." Patricia Wells was staring at me with something approaching relief. The other board members were looking between Marcus and me with growing alarm. Marcus himself looked like a man who just realized he was standing on quicksand. "I'm not sure where you're getting those numbers," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Our internal metrics show." "Your internal metrics show what you wanted to show," I interrupted gently. "But your customers are telling a different story. Your employees are telling a different story. Your bank account is telling a very different story." I stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. Picking up a marker, "Let me show you what Sterling Tech's situation actually looks like." For the next 10 minutes, I laid out the real financial picture of Sterling Tech revenue declining, expenses increasing, customer satisfaction plummeting, cash reserves depleting. I used Marcus's own data, just arranged in a way that showed the truth rather than hiding it. When I finished, the room was dead silent. Marcus was gripping the edge of the conference table, so hard his knuckles were white. "The question before this board," I said, returning to my seat, "is whether Sterling Tech's current leadership is capable of addressing these issues, or whether we need to consider alternative management strategies." That's when Marcus made his second critical mistake of the day. "I don't know who you think you are," he said, his voice rising slightly, "but I've been building this company for 3 years. I know this business better than anyone in this room. If you think you can come in here and—" "Mr. Sterling," I said quietly, and again the room went still. "I think there's something you should know about who I am." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out another folder, this one containing documents that Marcus had never seen before. Documents that showed the complete ownership structure of Sterling Tech Solutions. "Meridian Capital Partners isn't just an investor in Sterling Tech," I said, placing the documents on the table where everyone could see them. "Meridian Capital Partners owns 60% of Sterling Tech, which means I own 60% of Sterling Tech." Marcus's face went through several different expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, something approaching panic. "Which means," I continued in the same calm tone, "that every expense you've charged the company, every decision you made about resource allocation, every dollar you spent on maintaining your lifestyle has been my money." I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final piece of information that would complete Marcus's understanding of the situation. "And since we're being completely transparent, I should mention that I know Jessica Martinez quite well. We were engaged until last week, when she decided she needed someone with more ambition and financial vision." The color drained completely from Marcus's face. I could see him doing the mathematics, understanding finally that the woman he proposed had left her previous boyfriend for him, not knowing that her previous boyfriend was the man who controlled his company's future. "So," I said, standing and gathering my papers, "here's what's going to happen. You have 2 weeks to present a realistic business plan that addresses Sterling Tech's operational issues and puts the company on a path to profitability. That plan will include immediate cost reductions, customer retention strategies, and a management structure that prioritizes business results over personal image." I paused at the door of the conference room. "Or," I said quietly, We can discuss alternative leadership arrangements for the company. Your choice, Mr. Sterling. I left him sitting in that conference room, surrounded by board members who were finally seeing the true state of the company they trusted him to run. As I walked back to my Honda, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not satisfaction, exactly, more like completion. Justice through natural consequences. Accountability through transparent information. Marcus Sterling had built his lifestyle on money that belonged to me and courted my ex-fiancée with resources he'd obtained under false pretenses. Now he would have to choose between the company he claimed to be building and the image he'd been maintaining. I was curious to see which one he'd pick. But first, I had a phone call to make. Patricia Wells deserved to know that Sterling Tech was about to undergo some significant changes, and that her professional competence hadn't gone unnoticed by the people who mattered. The next 2 weeks were going to be very interesting for everyone involved.